Good evening, everyone. I am Tony Serta, a SAB officer here at CBC. We are delighted to have you here and share with us the initiative debate. Thank you for joining us. We would also like to extend our gratitude to those who helped make tonight possible. Tri-Cities Regional Chamber of Commerce, Pasco Chamber of Commerce, West Richland Chamber of Commerce, Tri-City Herald, Charter Communications, and the League of Women Voters. We are thrilled for tonight and would ask if all audience members could turn off their cell phones through the entirety of the event. Bathrooms are available outside of the Gjerde Center to the left of the exit doors. Prepare yourself to be challenged, inspired, and open your mind to new ideas. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our moderator of the night, Marilyn Perkins.
Thank you, Tony. It's been a real pleasure for our league to work with the students here at CBC. I am Marilyn Perkins, and I am a member of the League of Women Voters in Benton and Franklin counties. Once again, the league is pleased to be partnering with the Tri-City Regional, West Richland, and Pasco Chambers of Commerce, the City of Richland TV and Pasco TV, the Tri-City Herald, Charter Communications, who is filming here tonight, and the Associated Students of CBC. Tonight's forum will be replayed on Charter Channel 3 and also be available on YouTube. And if you live in Pasco, you might catch it on Channel 12 and in Richland on Channel 13. We will be taking written questions from the audience. If you need a card, raise your hand. We have some league members that are handing out cards. If you have a completed question, raise your hand too, and they'll get a card picked up from you when you're finished. And we have 3 issues. We're going to try and keep them each to about a half hour, so depending on how much time our participants take, we'll see how many questions we get through. We do not allow any audio or video recording without prior permission, so at this time, I'll remind you to turn off cell phones or any cameras or other recording devices. We also ask that all applause be saved for the end of the presentations. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which neither supports or opposes any candidate. It is our goal, along with that of our sponsors, sponsoring partners, to provide an opportunity for voters to become better informed about the people running for office and the issues that will be on the ballot this November. Tonight, we're going to hear about Initiative 1240, about the creation of charter schools in our state, Initiative 502, which deals with the legalization of marijuana, and Referendum 74, which gives voters the opportunity to support or reject marriage between people of the same sex. We're going to begin with Initiative 1240, and I would like to introduce our 2 speakers. Speaking in favor of the initiative is Trent House, and his opponent, speaking against this measure, is Terry Staudinger. Trent is representing Yes on 1240. Terry is representing People for Our Public Schools. Initiative measure number 1240 concerns creation of a public charter school system. This measure would authorize up to 40 publicly funded charter schools open to all students, operated through approved, non-religious, nonprofit organizations with government oversight, and modify certain laws applicable to them as public schools, should this measure be enacted into law. We forgot to toss, so I am going to go ahead and let the pro side begin with his opening statement. They've been giving 5 minutes. They don't need to take that much time, but Mr. Trent, Mr. House, go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this event. As was mentioned, my name is Trent House, and I'm here to encourage a yes on 1240. If I can convince you all of anything today, this single point I think is the most important, and that is that charter schools are public schools. They require teachers to live up to the exact same certification requirements that public schools do today. It requires that students live up to the same rigorous academic standards that they live up to today. And it also does not change in any way whatsoever the public funding of public schools. The money stays with the student, the money follows the student, and there is not a penny that will be removed from the public school system because of the establishment of a charter school. There's a lot of misconceptions about what a charter school can be, but let's talk about what's in this initiative. They can only be operated by independently managed nonprofit organizations that have been approved after they have submitted a very rigorous 32-point process. And they can only be approved by two entities, the local school board or a commission of 9 people that is established under this initiative that are appointed by then, either 3 from the governor, 3 from the Senate, and 3 from the House of Representatives. So what makes public charter schools different than the schools we have today? The facts are that charter schools will allow flexibility in the classroom that don't exist today. It will give teachers and principals the flexibility that they need to create customized learning environments. They will have flexibility in budgets, scheduling, staffing, and most importantly, and the reason why this initiative is before us today, develop classroom situations that help the students who are falling through the cracks today. Everyone knows that traditional public schools work really well for most students. I graduated from Quincy High School, not far from here. I had a great public school experience. But last year, 14,000 students dropped out of the public school system in the state of Washington. I'll make those numbers a little bit real to this community. In Yakima County, there were 806 people who dropped out of school last year. Walla Walla had 87. Franklin County had 257. Benton County had 384, and Grant County had 286 students who dropped out of the public school system. The state of Washington believes that the entitlements that come with a student who drops out of school cost the taxpayer somewhere around $10,000 per student. So let's just take, for example, Yakima County. Last year, the 806 students that dropped out of Yakima County cost the taxpayers of the entire state of Washington over $8 million. So let's talk a bit about what this charter school initiative does. It establishes charters that would be approved by either your local school district or by a commission established at the state level. They need to be focused on at-risk or students who are currently not getting the education that they need. Obviously, when we look at the numbers I've just presented to you, the dropout rates in these communities, while any one student dropping out of school is too many, they're not as high as some of the communities we see in the Puget Sound area, which are seeing 40% of their students dropping out of school. The Stanford University has done a pretty extensive research on charter schools, and both sides like to reference that study as proof that either charter schools do work or they don't work. What I would like to share with you from that study is that charter schools, if the charter is written correctly, are very successful. And so the opponents will use that study and look at the states that aren't as successful. But if you look at states like Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, Missouri, and Colorado, the 5 states that this initiative was modeled after, you will see that they have very successful charter school programs, and those are the states that we've used to model for this initiative. Charter schools are not something that are an experiment. They're not pilots. They have been around for 20 plus years, and we have the benefit of all of those years of experience to develop this charter initiative and bring it before you. 41 other states have charter schools. Washington is one of 9 who do not. There are more than 3 million parents who have opted to put their children into public charter schools. My question is, what do they know that the opponents of this initiative do know? I believe that this is an option that should be available for Washington voters. It's just an option. It's not a mandate, and would appreciate your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now hear from his opponent, Ms. Staudinger, and she is speaking against this proposal.
Well,
Go ahead. They'll adjust.
okay, I'm Terry Staudinger, and I'm a 21-year veteran teacher from Kennewick. And as you were told, I'm speaking in opposition of this initiative for many reasons. In the last 3 years alone, Washington has cut $2.5 billion from education. We have the 4th most crowded schools in the nation. Many of our schools have outdated textbooks and technology. They lack enrichment programs, and they don't have enough teachers to give students the individual attention they need. This initiative would divert millions of tax dollars into a brand new government bureaucracy to oversee the operation of this so-called public charter schools. These schools are called public because they are publicly funded, but unlike traditional public schools, they are privately operated, with only a tiny fraction of our kids would have access to these schools. Now, proponents of the initiative will say that charter schools will help struggling students. But in fact, there is no mandate that charter schools must serve struggling students, nor is there a mandate that struggling students will have the first shot at even getting into a charter school. A recent New York Times report shows that charters proportionately enroll fewer students with special needs than traditional public schools, and national civil rights groups oppose charter schools due to concern over segregation and charter schools' failure to meet the needs of students of color. A charter school does not guarantee admittance for any student. Which student gets in is by lottery, not by need. Now, proponents will say that charter schools do better than traditional public schools, but in fact, Washington currently leads the nation in combined average SAT scores, which debunks the much stated but unsubstantiated myth that Washington public schools are failing. In comparison, the most extensive study done so far shows that 17% of charter schools only 17% of charter schools perform better than traditional public schools, with twice as many performing worse. Proponents of the initiative will say that it ensures oversight and accountability, but in fact, existing public schools could be converted to a charter school without professional assessment or investigation. Public schools would be defenseless against those holding the opinion that a particular school is ineffective. Initiative 1240 authorizes out-of-state private operators to run charter schools. It sets up a new bureaucracy to oversee charters, which will be run by political appointees who are unaccountable to the local voters. Charters would allow the use of school funds. These are funds raised through local levy campaigns, even though the charters are not accountable to local school boards, voters, or taxpayers. Now, I know proponents say that other states have charters and we should just jump on that bandwagon, but while it is true that many states do have charters, that does not mean that charters are right for Washington students. We want proven solutions, not false promises for our kids. The voters have already rejected charters 3 times, and this time it took the proponents millions of dollars just to get it on the ballot, and they will spend millions more on TV ads and radio ads. In this community, we have several rural schools, schools like Kaibi and Finley and Touchy and Prosser. Charters will be those schools will be especially hard hit by charter schools because charters get the state and local per student funding for their students. As my opponent said, the money follows the student. The cost of operating those schools doesn't go down, just the funding. That will have a huge impact on those schools that rely on every single penny just to survive. Now, I was born and raised right here in the Tri-Cities, and I care about our community. We already have some great innovative schools that already operate in the public school system, schools that are located right here in the Tri-Cities. Now, can we improve on what we have? Well, of course we can, but the problem isn't the schools or the current system. We do not need to divert more money away from our current public schools by creating a new government bureaucracy that only serves a tiny fraction of our students, has no guarantee of success, and costs the taxpayers millions of dollars. To fix the problems of public schools, the state needs to live up to its paramount duty to fully fund public education.
Thank you. I have several questions here. They have 2 minutes for an answer. The person who goes first also gets a 1-minute rebuttal. but feel free not to use all your time, and we won't judge you negatively if you don't, and that way we can maybe get through more questions. And if you don't want to say anything in the rebuttal, don't feel like you have to. But we'll begin with Mr. House. If the initiative passes, will charter schools be allowed to open or required to open? And maybe you can address, will the first 40 get chosen, or will there be some selection process?
Great. So the initiative authorizes up to 40, but it doesn't mandate, require, or state that 40 have to come into place. There will be an application process. The application process spells out in very detailed manner the questions that my opponent has already brought up tonight about funding, staffing, curriculum, the audience that they're trying to serve, and the problem that they're trying to address. The local school board is most likely going to be the entity that approves the charter school. There is a state commission, not a bureaucracy. The commission is 9 people. They're appointed 3 by the governor, 3 by the Senate, 3 by the House. There's not a new state agency or new operation that is necessary to run this program. At the end of 5 years, and after the charter schools have been up and running, the legislature is directed to come back and thoroughly investigate whether or not charters have been working. My question is, if charters aren't effective, if they're not working, why did last year the 41 states that do have them expand the number they have by 500? If charter schools don't effectively cater to underprivileged and struggling students, why did Newsweek say of transformative high schools, those high schools that are focused on kids that are low income, why did they say that 60% of the top 25 transformative high schools in the country were charter schools? They are effective. They allow for flexibility. They let teachers adapt for customized learning experiences in classrooms that help students that aren't getting the education they need today. This is not something that is not tested. It's not a big bureaucracy. It will not cost more money.
Thank you, and we'll move on to Ms. Stottinger.
Well, I would just like to reiterate some of the things that I said before. Studies have shown that, and this is the most extensive study that's up to date, that only 17% of charter schools do better than traditional public schools.
Is there anything you want to add?
Sure. And I'll go back to my opening statement. If you take the 5 states that our initiative is modeled after, they far exceed the outcomes of traditional public schools. It's the states that don't have strong charters that aren't doing as well that my opponent likes to cite. But this initiative that you're voting on this year is not drafted after those states. It's drafted after the most successful states.
Okay. We've done the pro, the con, and the rebuttal on that question. We'll begin this question with Mrs. Stottinger. I'm sorry. If this measure is approved, what will be the relationship between charter schools and the teacher unions?
Well, I'm afraid that I really can't answer that. I'm not really sure about that.
I bet you have something to say.
Well, honestly, for me, this issue isn't about unions. It's about the 14,000 students that aren't getting their education today. And so all I can say is when it comes to the union question, there's nothing preventing staff members that work at charter schools from being unionized. This isn't an issue of unionization. This is a question about whether or not the kids that are in our classrooms are getting the education that they need. And there are 41 other states that provide this option to parents and teachers, and it's been popular with more than 3 million parents. So all we're asking is for this option to be available in Washington.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add?
Well, I will say that the WEA, that's Washington Education Association, has come out against this initiative.
Okay, well, that helps a little bit in our understanding. Every little bit of information might be helpful for those of you who are trying to decide how you want to vote. Here is a question. How would charter schools help or not help, possibly, overcrowding in the Pasco School District? And we'll begin with the pro side, which is you, Mr. House.
So if you look at the intent of the legislation, again, the focus is on at-risks and struggling students. if you have a situation where a local community feels like the classroom sizes are too big or too crowded, and the students in those classrooms are not being successful, or there are high dropout rates, a charter can be established with its focus of reaching those students that are struggling and not getting the attention that they need. So in the application process, the 32-point application process that this initiative outlines, it would have to be demonstrated to either the local school board or to the state commission that the need for this charter school exists. If, after the application was submitted, the 32 points were successfully answered as to how they would staff the school, fund the school, what the focus of the school would be, and the charter's established, then that charter will have 5 years to go out and demonstrate success. And at the end of the 5 years, the legislature is asked to sit down and review the pluses and minuses of the charter to see whether or not they've been successful or not. So there is a catch at the end of this in 5 years so that there is oversight for the legislature to come back and make tweaks. And in the meantime, those 14,000 students that are now dropping out of the system have an opportunity to get the education that they're not getting today.
Okay. Ms. Stottinger?
Well, again, there is no mandate for these charter schools to serve struggling students, and there's no guarantee that these struggling students will even get into a charter school. It's by lottery. As far as the overcrowding issue in Pasco, Pasco has no more room to put these students. So, maybe my opponent will tell us where we're going to put these new charter schools.
Thank you. Do you have something you want to add quickly?
Yeah, there is no lottery. The only time a lottery comes into play is when there are more students that are making application than there are slots in that charter school. So when the application's made and the school says we're going to serve 500 students and 550 sign up to be part of that charter school, there's a lottery now to decide which 500 get into that school. That's the only time there's a lottery. There's not a lottery any other time. And I would argue that if there are that many students that want to be out of the traditional public school to a charter school, that we're actually providing a service that people need and want.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with you, Ms. Stottinger. There are a couple questions here about the $40 million. Someone says, TS said, and I don't know if that's you, no monies will be removed from the present school funding. Does this mean we will have an increased budget to meet funding for additional 40 schools? Explain how the taxpayers might lose $40 million. What does that mean? So I think they want you to address the 40 million figure.
Well, okay, I don't recall saying $40 million, but
You're the only TS, so I don't know.
well, I just can say that all the money, all the funds come from the same pot. So it's not like more funding is going to suddenly become available. It's all going to come from the same pot of money. So therefore, our current school system will lose money if it's diverted to a charter school, because there's no more money available. You take from one and you give to the other.
Thank you. Mr. House?
So the money follows the student. The students will attend the public charter school after this initiative is adopted. There is no money taken out of the public school system. The same amount of money is allocated by the legislature. That money then follows that student to that new charter school. There are over 2,300 public schools in the state of Washington, and we're talking about 40 charter schools over 5 years. I don't understand where the loss of revenue comes from. There isn't any. The legislature allocates that money, and that money is going into the system, and there's the same number of students. So what happens is the money follows the student, just like it would today if it was in a school in one part of this community, that student then transferred to another school within this community. The money stays in your local community and follows the student that it was allocated to. So there's no reduction in funding, there's no less money. The hope, obviously, is that the charter school will be able to succeed with the money that it's been allocated, where the public schools have not been able to.
Do you have any follow-up on that?
We have great public schools. They are not failures. And it seems like there was an assumption here that, public schools have failed. But as I said, Washington leads the nation in combined average SAT scores, and this is for the 9th year in a row. If public schools are so bad, how do we always end up on top when it comes to SATs?
Okay, thank you. I think we'll just do one question. I'm going to limit you to a minute and no rebuttal on this one. We'll try and get in one more. Bill Gates is the leading proponent of charter schools. He is also a leader in the implementation of Common Core curriculum. Will the charter schools embrace that concept of Common Core curriculum? And we'll begin with the pro side.
The charter school must, first of all, comply with all the state laws. So there's nothing that a charter school can do that's different, separate, or distinct from what public schools do. Once they've satisfied all of those requirements, the things they do in addition to that would be up to the charter school and would be based on that local community's needs and what those students need that they aren't currently receiving. A clarification I would like to make is that I believe the public schools in Washington are terrific. And the initiative before us isn't about the regular school system failing. The students that are succeeding and doing well and having high test scores are to be congratulated, and that's a testament to our public school system. Charter schools are about the 14,000 students that are falling through the cracks. It's about the students who never take an SAT score test because they didn't make it to graduation. That's what we're worried about. We're worried about the student that didn't graduate.
Thank you. And Ms. Staudinger?
Yes, we have great innovative schools that do serve special needs. And what we need to do is fund our public schools, not create a new bureaucracy.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the closing statements. I know there are more questions here, and I'm sorry we can't get to all of them. Each side has 2 minutes for their closing remarks, and we'll begin with Mr. House.
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. Our coalition is broad. It includes parents and teachers. In this community alone, I apologize, I should have had this out already, but Karen Albers, PTA member in Richland, Robert Garrison in Kennewick, Jessica Rinker, an educator in Kennewick, Linda Blair, parent in Kennewick, hundreds of people in this local community. I'm not going to spend all my time reading through my list here. A number of bipartisan lawmakers. This is not a political issue. President Obama and Governor Romney both support charter schools. This is about providing an option that doesn't exist today. It's about identifying students who are falling through the cracks and trying to give them something they don't have today. It's not about attacking what we've got. It's not about trying to say that what we have today is bad. That's not at all what charter schools is about. It's about giving options. It's about bringing change to a system that needs it for a certain demographic. And if charter schools don't work, I again ask you, why do 41 other states do them? Why were 500 more implemented last year? Why would transformative high schools who educate underprivileged students have the highest success rates amongst charter schools? I think the answer is because they're successful. Innovative schools are terrific, but innovative schools in Washington address the needs of the kids that are succeeding. Charter schools will address the needs of the students that are failing, and that's what we're trying to get to. There's a social cost to the fact that these students are falling out of the system. The state of Washington says that every student that doesn't graduate costs the state $10,000 in entitlement costs. If we have 14,000 students dropping out every year, that's money that every community is paying in different ways through different tax dollars. Let's improve the public school system by allowing charters as an option. Thank you.
Thank you. And you get the final 2 minutes worth of talking on this side.
Well, thank you. If 1240 passes on November 6th, it would authorize up to 40 privately operated but taxpayer-funded charter schools. This initiative would not address any of the problems we face in education. It wouldn't reduce class size. It wouldn't restore the arts or enrichment programs. It would not replace aging textbooks or technology. And it sure won't hire more teachers to meet the needs of all of our students. Instead, it will drain money away from our existing programs. It creates a whole new government bureaucracy, and it will cause many of our very smaller schools some real financial hardship. Charter schools have not proven themselves to be beneficial. Studies have shown that the vast majority of charter schools perform worse than traditional public schools. Charter schools are not the answer for Washington State. Instead of charter schools, we need to abide by the McCleary decision and fully fund public education. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. House and Ms. Staudinger for agreeing to be here with us tonight. It's not always easy, but I know they both feel strongly about the sides they're representing, and I want to thank you again for coming. We'll take a 5-minute quick break and bring up the two speakers that will be talking on Referendum 74. The next segment of our forum we'll deal with Referendum 74, and I will read to you what it will say on the ballot. The legislature passed in gross substitute Senate Bill 6239 concerning marriage for same-sex couples, modified domestic partnership law, and religious freedom, and voters have filed a sufficient referendum petition on this bill. The bill would allow same-sex couples to marry, preserve domestic partnerships only for seniors, and preserve the right of clergy or religious organizations to refuse to perform, recognize, or accommodate any marriage ceremony. Shall this bill be approved or rejected? And speaking tonight for those in favor is Maureen Walsh, and those opposed is Ann Berkey. And again, since we didn't do a coin toss, we'll go ahead and start with the pro side and begin with you, Ms. Walsh.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here tonight. This is an issue that is important to me. I think it's important to a lot of people. I think that this country was built on our freedoms, our liberties, and equality. And to me, this is an issue of equality. I've been in the legislature for a lot of years, and I certainly understood when I heard from folks who didn't agree with this based on religious convictions, and I understand that. But my job as a legislator is not to legislate from the Bible. My job as a legislator is to make sure that all citizens in this country understand and recognize the freedoms and the liberties that they have. And I feel very strongly that this bill goes a long way to making sure that people don't feel like second-class citizens in this great country of ours. I gave a speech on the House floor this year. I was one of just 2 Republicans in the House of Representatives that supported this legislation. And a lot of people seem to think that I supported it because my daughter is gay. Well, my daughter came out of the closet a couple of years ago, but the reality was that I co-sponsored domestic partnerships 4 years ago, thinking that it was the everything but marriage law. I thought that was fair. But then I came to find out a couple years later that it really wasn't everything but marriage. There were still federal rights that were not the same, portability that is not the same between the states. And frankly, I don't understand why 2 consenting adults who are committed to each other in life can't have that tremendous feeling and that wonderful bond of a marriage. I think that's very important, and I frankly think that it's the right thing to do. I think it's time that our country, along with many other countries, will pick this up as a fair human right and a civil rights issue for all of the citizens of this country. And thank you again for having me here tonight.
Thank you. And Ms. Berkey?
Well, good evening. My name is Ann Berkey, and I'm a wife and mother of 4 children. I am also the volunteer regional coordinator for Preserve Marriage Washington here in Southeast Washington. We are the Reject R74 campaign. Our campaign in Washington is a diverse coalition of thousands of volunteers, including faith and community groups, that reject the legislature's decision to redefine marriage. Thanks to the 250,000 residents, 250,000 people, Bill 6239 is now on the ballot for this November for all Washingtonians to vote whether to uphold the standard of marriage or to redefine it. When voters receive their ballots, we are urging voters to reject on Referendum 74 for 3 reasons. First, same-gender couples already have full legal equality. Secondly, marriage is more than about recognizing the relationship between 2 adults. It is about what children need to function at their best. And third, we must mark reject because of the known and unknown profound consequences to society for this generation and generations to come. In 2009, voters approved the Everything But Marriage law here in Washington. That means that a same-gender couple in Washington already has every legal right and obligation that a married opposite-sex couple has. No exceptions. Approving Referendum 74 will not grant any new benefits to these couples in this state. It will be a disadvantage, however, to the children of this state. Children will benefit from rejecting R74. Children do best when raised by their married mother and father. There is overwhelming evidence that shows children are financially and emotionally and physically better off when raised by both of their biological parents. While we recognize that unfortunately not all family circumstances provide for this environment, we still believe in upholding the unique relationships between mother, father, and children. By making marriage genderless, lawmakers and society belittles the roles of mothers and a father. Gender does matter. It is an essential characteristic of each individual and family relationship and should not be disregarded. Marriage is the only institution that not only unites a man and a woman, but also binds any children born to them. The best family situation is for a child to be raised by both biological parents. Children should have the right to know and be cared for by their mother and their father. Stripping marriage of its male and female qualities will shift marriage from being a public institution that binds children to their parents to an arrangement focused on the personal desires of 2 adults. Life is filled with standards. We have standards of measurement for time, weight, size, length, distance. Standards make life easier by providing a commonly agreed upon reference point for measurement. Marriage historically has been a standard in every society that recognizes the importance of creating families. While not every opposite-sex couple has the desire or the capacity to create children in their marriage, the best potential environment is still there and does not mean that the ideal of traditional marriage and families is broken. Lastly, those who support traditional marriage and object to the same-gender marriages will continue to become further scrutinized and eventually either be forced to comply with the new law or be subjected to the seizure of their licenses, businesses, and/or monetary compensation. In New Mexico, a photographer who had declined on religious grounds to photograph a same-sex commitment ceremony was fined $6,000. Professors at state universities in Illinois and Wisconsin were fired or disciplined for expressing personal convictions that homosexual behavior is sinful. Candidates for master's degrees in counseling in Georgia and in Michigan universities were penalized or dismissed from their programs. And in Vermont, where same-gender marriage is legal, Christian innkeepers were recently fined $30,000 for refusing a same-sex couple to use their private property for a wedding ceremony and reception. With all of these examples and many more, we still are only beginning to see the effects in our society. And as a New York Times writer recently said, same-sex marriage is a social experiment, and like most social experiments, it will take time to understand its consequences. I urge you to reject Referendum 74.
Thank you. We'll move on to the question and answer portion, and we'll start with you, Ms. Walsh. This question refers to all of the things that have been achieved. For gays, it says in 207 they asked for and received domestic partnership registry. Excuse me, 208 they asked for and got 170 rights and responsibilities. 209, everything but marriage. Now they want marriage. If this is passed, what's next? Will clergy be asked and forced to perform gay marriage? If they refuse, will they be sued? This is certainly the way it looks like it's headed if you look at Canada and other countries which legalize gay marriage. So if you would address that concern.
I think you're right. I think that incrementally, folks who have wanted to have gay marriage decided they would take it slowly and they would try to do it in stages. And that's what they've been pretty successful doing, because I think they've instilled in people that they're not wicked people, they're not horrible people, they're your brothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, your parents, your neighbors. They're people that are tax-paying citizens in this country that just want to be able to be considered equal. And I see nothing wrong with that. Yes, they did it in stages, and I think that was probably a smart way to go. You know, when we talk about some of the other issues that have come to us in our nation, in the history of our nation, you know, it was the vocal majority that spoke out against women's right to vote back in the 20s. It was the vocal majority that spoke out about biracial marriages back in 1967 when we finally legalized those. It was the vocal majority that spoke out against equal rights for black people in this country as well. And you know what? It took strong individuals who were in our legislatures and in our Congress to stand up and say, this is wrong. Let's fix this. This is not the right thing to do. And I feel very strongly that there have been gay people in this world for many, many years. And to deny them the basic right of being able to say that I am committed to this person in life. This is the person I want to be with in life. I don't want to have to call it a domestic partnership. I don't want to have to call it a civil union. I want what my fellow citizens of this country have, and that is marriage. And I want all the rights that go along with it. I know gay couples that are raising beautiful children and doing a beautiful job at it. I work on the Children and Families Committees. I see the horrible consequences of destroyed marriages, and I see the horrible consequences of people not raising their own children. And I begin to question the argument about the healthiness of having a mother and a father. What kids need are parents that will have their back. And that's exactly what these gay couples that I know are doing. They're raising beautiful children, and they're defending those children, and they're raising them in an atmosphere that doesn't breed hate. And I personally think that that's a good thing, and I frankly will support this as long as I can.
Mrs. Berkey?
Well, thank you. First of all, this is not a message of hate. This is a message of love. And while I myself, and I know many of us who disagree with this legislature's decision, it is not a message of not loving our brothers and sisters in our communities and in Washington State. This is about changing a law that will have many consequences. First, one thing that I want to bring up is that it's false to presume that sex, unlike race, isn't a rationally relevant difference. It's false to also presume that any distinction between the two types of relationships, a homosexual versus a heterosexual relationship, is discrimination. Anti-discrimination principle is being used to ask citizens to be able to call something whatever they want to call it. And while we recognize that there are commitments between two people of the same gender that need those rights, we've already given that here in Washington, and we've already recognized that. But their relationship is different from a heterosexual relationship. Their relationship is not a marriage. And I want to further point out that there are four other circumstances that marriage is limited in Washington. First, you have to be over 18 years of age. Second, not already married to someone else. And third, you cannot marry a relative. You cannot be of the same gender. I argue that would my opponent recognize or support any of the other three circumstances in which marriage is denied.
Do you want to add anything?
No.
Okay, that gives us more time for questions. We have one here, and I wasn't sure which one, but it talks about known consequences. Are you the one that referred to that? It says, what are the known consequences you are talking about as far as, I guess?
Oh, yes, okay. Well, right now, we know that in other states where this has already been legalized, for example, in Massachusetts, parental rights were taken away from the parents in Massachusetts. In 2007, the Supreme Court ruled that parents had no right to opt out their children of public instruction that was objectionable to them morally or religiously. In Vermont, as I already stated, they have already started fining a couple for $30,000 for refusing to have a commitment ceremony on their property. What we do know is that professionals, lawyers, doctors, counselors, teachers, anybody who objects to this principle and this new definition of marriage will become further scrutinized, and we see the effects of that. We also don't know how many more things will come through that will propagate further intolerance for people who object to this issue.
Walsh?
Intolerance is intolerance. And to me, you know, if I were a gay couple, I don't think I would go to anybody who would object to performing some service for me. I think that sounds ridiculous and absurd, and I don't see that happening. And I'm not sure, but we have rules already, and we do not discriminate based on gender in this state and in this country. So frankly, discrimination is discrimination. And to try to use those examples to exemplify what could possibly be consequences from this legislation, I think is not very rational. You know, I just don't really see major consequences, negative consequences, from allowing two individuals who truly love each other to commit to each other in life. And I see gay couples raising children, and they're doing a beautiful job at it. So I really just don't understand what consequences to which you're referring. I don't see a bunch of lawsuits breaking out. I don't see gay couples wanting to use people who are homophobic to provide those services to them. So I think that point is kind of moot.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything?
Sure. Well, what this is not about is people's motives and intentions. And we recognize that there are same-gender couples that are, as well as single parents and other types of couples that are doing their very best to raise children in the best of their ability. What we are saying is, does this make good public policy to change an institution and to change a definition and a meaning of something that has been so widely recognized for hundreds of years, and that also essentially identifies a relationship where children are procreated, where there is a bodily union, and where there is sacrifice that's made not only on a husband and wife's behalf, but intended to care for their children.
Thank you. We're getting lots of questions. Unfortunately, we won't have time for all of them. I have a couple here, though, that I will try and combine, and we'll begin with the pro side again. Is that where we are? Did you go first last time? I'm supposed to know this, aren't I? And I'm checking off things. Okay. But you rebutted, so you went first. Okay, so Ms. Walsh, it says, how can we presume to redefine marriage when we are not the one who defined it? And along that line, some argue that marriage has always meant the same thing, one man and one woman. Others think that marriage has evolved over the centuries in many different ways. Which description do you most agree with, and can you give examples to support your position?
You know, I don't think we're redefining marriage at all. I think marriage is a bond and a commitment between two consenting adults that hopefully lasts for a lifetime, although we certainly have found in history that that certainly is not the case. There's been a lot of divorce, there's been a whole lot of procreating going on, and we've got a lot of kids out there that have frankly fallen through the cracks because we haven't had strong marriages. I think it's a wonderful thing that gay couples would aspire to be married. I think it's a healthy sign that these are two people that are committed to each other. They want to be able to commit in life, and what has been widely and traditionally held as that basic bond, that commitment, has been labeled marriage. So why would we label that something else based on the gender of those two individuals? Just because they can't make babies? Well, guess what? They adopt babies. There's a lot of couples that are heterosexual that don't make babies. They don't choose to have children, or they can't have children. They may go out and adopt children. That's a wonderful thing. And that's exactly what these gay couples are asking for too. Is that right to have that same wonderful bond of what we have traditionally held in this country and in this society as a marriage? And to me, semantics are very important. And to call it something else, label it something else, that pretty much sends those folks into a second-class citizen status because they cannot label their relationship the same as what everybody else in this room or potentially in this room has had. You know, I was thrilled to be married. I was married for 23 years. I got 3 beautiful children. And, you know, that was the most important bond in my life, was with my husband. And, you know, I just really think denying anybody that ability to have that in their life, I think that's cruel.
Thank you. Ms. Berkey?
Yes. Well, first of all, as I was going back to my point before, is that this is really not about marriage equality. Because if this was about marriage equality, this would be about supporting polygamous, polyandrous, and incestual relationships as well. And because if you're using the word equal, that is what that's what you're presuming by saying the words marriage equality. And so where do we draw the line? And I have to say that the line is that there are 2 distinct types of relationships. Okay, is this a pen? Is it a pen? It's a pen. Well, what if I say I want to call it a pencil? And if you don't call it a pencil, I'm offended. And if you don't give me the same rights to call this a pencil, I'm going to sue you. What we have is 2 different types of relationships, and they mean 2 different things. And it is not about discriminating against somebody else because I want to define marriage as what it's meant for many years. And it has nothing to do with loving other people. I love people, you know. I happened to run into a lesbian woman the other day when I was out putting up yard signs. And I told her, I love her, but I do not accept the definition and the behavior that she is doing. But it doesn't change the fact that we are committed to families, to children, and supporting the best and most ideal environment for children to be raised in.
Okay, do you want to?
I do.
Okay, if you'll hold your applause till the end, thank you.
You know, I don't know what behavior it is that you think that lesbian is engaging in, but number one, it's none of your business.
Okay. Okay, you each got 1 shot time, so that's it.
Okay.
No, you can keep going.
Okay. And, you know, it just seems to me that if God put us all on this earth and we are all God's children, that it's pretty presumptuous for one group of individuals to say that another group of individuals is not entitled to the same right that they are to be able to have their love labeled as a marriage. I just think that is discriminatory right on the surface. And, you know, to be honest with you, this whole issue kind of boils down to sexual discrimination to me anyway. And at some point, you know, I think the reality is that we have gay people on this earth. And I think that those gay people were put on this earth by our Lord. And frankly, I am just absolutely appalled that there would be another group of individuals that would feel that they have the right to oppress those people and make them feel like they are not worthy of the same rights, human rights, and civil rights that we all are.
Thank you. I think we'll try and squeeze in 2 more questions and give you each just a minute and no rebuttal. We have a couple, and since we're starting on the con side, they are addressing this to you, but we'll ask Ms. Welch to respond also. Could you be more specific on how a same-sex couple getting married really affects your marriage? Another person says gay marriage or any marriage, other marriage does not really affect my marriage. So.
Okay, that's a good question. Well, first, it weakens the ideal of marriage, and it's going to teach that children that marriage is fundamentally about adults' emotions and not bodily union or children, with what marital norms are tightly intertwined. It will also further diminish the ideal setting, which is for a child to be raised by both a mother and a father. And third, it will affect moral and religious freedoms of a large population of people, including myself, who object to this principle. We have 1/4% of these people in Washington state that have filed for domestic partnership, but yet we have over 250,000 signatures and more people that object to this measure.
Well, again, I'm sorry, but my role as a legislator is to speak out for the minority. And yeah, you're right. I don't think we're going to have thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of couples clamoring to be married in a same-sex marriage ceremony. I don't see that happening. It is a small group of individuals, but those folks are just as entitled to the same rights that you and I as heterosexual people are entitled to. And I just don't really understand, the whole argument about children. My goodness. Do you think we're doing a perfect job, a stellar job with our heterosexual marriages raising children? I can tell you right now we're not. I serve on too many committees in the legislature where I've seen evidence of broken families, children being raised with abuse. And I'll tell you right now, I am just completely convinced that a gay couple can raise their children just as well as a heterosexual couple. And frankly, I see it happening all the time. I was the one who went away to work. I kind of had a role reversal with my husband to some degree. For 23 years, I went over to the legislature, and my husband stayed home with the kids. My husband was the better cook by far than I am. And I mean, at some point, when we start labeling individuals, we're going back to an era where, frankly, discrimination is being accepted as far as the sexes are concerned, and I, for one, as a woman, am highly offended by that.
And we will start with you on this question, and you might be able to clarify the law for people. If same-sex marriage is approved in Washington state and I own a business here, will it be lawful for me to respectfully offer or suggest that a same-sex couple seek another business provider? And would you agree or disagree with them being able to do that? And I'm not sure what the law is specifically in Washington.
Well, again, I'm just not too sure we're going to have too many same-sex couples that would like to deal with a person who is homophobic. I don't think they're going to want those services provided by those people. And, to say that there's going to be a bunch of lawsuits and everything over this, I think that's just absurd.
Okay. And would you like to comment on that?
Yes. Well, first of all, we've already seen that in other states that's not the case. And secondly, the matter is about what is best and what is the best public policy for Washington. And when we look at making good policy, we realize that not everybody's going to like our decisions. And there's going to be in Washington, businesses and professionals are not exempt from this new law. Only clergy and churches are. So if you're a doctor, a lawyer, counselor, or a teacher, or a wedding photographer, an artist, or any other business, you are not exempt from considered to be discriminating against a same-sex couple.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank, we have closing statements, and I didn't quite forget. And they have their 2 minutes for a closing statement, and we will begin with Ms. Welch.
Okay. You know, I think that love is a very strong emotion, and I think that everybody's entitled to have love in their life. And when you're lucky enough to find that other person in your life that you commit to, that bonds with you, that puts you on a pedestal and you put them on a pedestal, I think you're darn lucky. And it just seems to me to deny two individuals the right to call something as strong as the association with the word marriage really means historically and traditionally in this country and in this world. I find that pure, right on the surface, I find that discriminatory. And you know, I think in the 1920s when folks were, you know, talking against women having the right to vote, I think we realized how wrong that was. I think in 1967 when we finally allowed for biracial marriage, I think folks would scratch their head today and say, what in the world were we thinking? When we finally allowed black people to have the same rights to sit at the same counter at the lunch, or same stool at the lunch counter as everyone else. And now 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years later, I think we think, what in the world were we thinking? And you know what? I think this is going to be an issue like that too. I think we're going to say, you know what? There's some really decent gay people out there. And why in the world would I ever deny them that right to have what I've been able to have as a heterosexual couple? I just find this whole issue a little bit shocking that this country has been so slow to embrace this. And I understand that if you read the Bible and you adhere to the tenets of the Bible, that you might have some moral objection to this. My parents have been married for 60 years in the Catholic Church. And when I called them about this and I told them what I was doing in the legislature, my mother said, Maureen, it's the human genome. And my father mentioned the lovely lesbian couple that lived down the street who are raising beautiful children. They get it. Our young people get it. And frankly, I think this country will finally embrace this. And I think the Supreme Court will ultimately rule that this is the right thing to do.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Ms. Berkey for your closing thoughts.
Thank you. First of all, I want to remit that this will not provide any new rights in the state of Washington for same-gender couples. They already have all full legal equality under the 2009 Domestic Partnership Law. There will be profound consequences for anyone who disagrees with this potential new definition of marriage. A common myth is that somehow same-sex marriage will coexist in the law alongside traditional marriage. But the truth is, when marriage is redefined, it becomes the sole definition of marriage for everyone. No more husbands and wives, only spouse one and spouse two. No more mothers and fathers, just parent one and parent two. Recently, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Vincent Gray, said in reference to supporters of traditional marriage that, quote, there is just no place for them in this city. Gray's statement provides a clear illustration of how our religious liberties are at stake when marriage is redefined. For Gray suggests that supporters of traditional marriage have no place in the District of Columbia. This is similar to statements from mayors in other groups that support same-gender marriage, such as in Chicago, Boston, and San Francisco. We are all policymakers, and as policymakers, not everyone will like the decision that is made. You must do what you think is best, not just for yourself or for your neighbor, but for the society as a whole. Same-gender couples have all the rights and obligations that a married couple has in Washington. Lastly, Thomas Jefferson said, "This is the tendency of all human governments. A departure from principle in one instance becomes a precedent for a second, that second for a third, and so on, till the bulk of society is reduced to the mere automatons of misery, and to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. I testify that what we choose to do in this state concerning marriage, we will be held accountable for, and we should act responsibly for the citizens of Washington and the families and children of this generation and generations to come." Thank you. I ask you to vote reject on R-74.
I would like to thank both Ann Berkey and Maureen Walsh And I know this is a very sensitive and emotional subject for many people, but hopefully, if you're undecided by any chance, you'll do more research and hopefully make what you think is a good choice. Thanks again. This last one that we're going to be dealing with is Initiative 502, and I will read you how it will be worded on the ballot. This measure would license and regulate marijuana production, distribution, and possession for persons over 21. Remove state law criminal and civil penalties for activities that it authorizes, tax marijuana sales, and earmark marijuana-related revenues. Should this measure be enacted into law, yes or no? And we have two people with us tonight speaking for this initiative. We have Allison Holcomb, and speaking against this, we have Steve Sarich. And we will begin again with the pro side and Ms. Holcomb.
Good evening, and thank you all very much for being here tonight. I'd like to first tell you why we've put Initiative 502 on the ballot. And the reason for that is simply this. Our marijuana laws are not working. Despite decades of using the criminal justice system as our primary tool for pushing back against what's really a public health issue, the use of marijuana in our communities, we've had absolutely zero impact on the availability of marijuana or its use by members of society. Furthermore, our criminal laws against marijuana are actually compromising our safety. Every minute that a police officer, a prosecutor, a judge, a court staff person is spending on an adult marijuana possession case is a minute that they could have been spending combating violent crime. Moreover, by pushing marijuana into the black market, we are literally enriching multinational violent criminal organizations that have now come into Washington and are growing marijuana plants in our national parks, on our tribal lands, in swaths of rental homes. And we're also making a mockery of our medical marijuana laws. Right now, unfortunately, we're seeing an increasing number of charlatans that are entering into what is a burgeoning industry that is operating outside of any regulation, taxation, or quality control on the products that are being sold to patients with terminal and debilitating medical illnesses. And while we are funneling billions of dollars into this black market, we are depriving ourselves and our communities of tax revenues that could be invested in programs and services that we know support our families and our communities. So it's time for a new approach. Initiative 502 is a very carefully considered, thoughtfully constructed attempt, a proposal to start shifting our response to marijuana's existence in our society from being one of the prohibition model to a more public health model. It is endorsed and sponsored by former U.S. attorneys, public health physicians, the former special agent in charge of the FBI's Seattle division, judges, the NAACP, state legislators from both sides of the aisles, the mayors and city council members and county executives of numbers of jurisdictions across the state, and even the Children's Alliance has come out and endorsed Initiative 502. In a nutshell, here's what it does. It makes it legal for adults 21 and over to possess and use personal use amounts of marijuana. Moreover, it creates a tightly regulated system for licensing Washington farmers and Washington businesses to control the sale and growth of marijuana in our communities. The State Office of Financial Management has produced a fiscal note analyzing the financial impacts of Initiative 502 and estimates that it can generate up to $1.9 billion with a B dollars in new tax revenue over the next 5 years. Much of those funds will be dedicated to health care, prevention, research, education, administration, and importantly, monitoring and evaluation of the implementation of the measure. So if we need to correct course, we'll have the information that we need to do so. On the flip side, it also points out that while we're not necessarily going to take money out of our criminal justice system because it's already overburdened, we will be able to free up time for our police, for our prosecutors, for our judges to refocus some of their attention and focus to more important priorities and start clearing up backlogs in our courts. Now, one of the questions that we hear a lot is, what about the federal law? What about the federal government? And to be completely frank, there is nothing we can do legally to prevent the federal government from coming in and arresting and prosecuting anybody who decides to get a license and grow marijuana or sell marijuana within the state of Washington. This is a political question, though, and what we can do is we can look at the experience with medical marijuana. Since 1996, there are now 17 states, plus even Washington, D.C., that have medical marijuana laws on the books. In half of those states, they include licensing and regulation of the production and distribution of marijuana. The federal government's position has been to not focus federal law enforcement resources on people in clear and unambiguous compliance with those state laws. This initiative is tightly drafted in a way that we can step forward with the federal government in collaboration rather than conflict, and this needs to start with the states. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Mr. Sarich.
Good evening. Thank you. Hard to know where to begin to sort out the truth from the lies here. Does anybody in this room believe that the federal government is going to allow the state of Washington to grow, distribute, sell, and tax 187,000 pounds of marijuana next year and do nothing about it? It's absolutely ridiculous. You take states like Colorado that have highly regulated, state licensed, voter approved, highly taxed dispensaries specifically just for medical patients, not for recreational users. 57 of them have been closed down this year. 2 years ago, the federal prosecutor in Spokane in one day came in and raided every single dispensary on the east side and closed them all down. 3 more federal letters went out today in Seattle, making the total of federal letters closing down dispensaries there at 29 in the last 2 weeks. And in Montana, they closed down the feds went in there in one day and they closed down every dispensary in Montana. One of these people who was growing medical marijuana for a dispensary was just sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. His name is Chris Williams. Now, does anybody believe that the federal government is going to let us sell 93.5 tons of marijuana every year in the state of Washington? If you do, I've got a bridge for you. So there's not going to be any tax laws. Ms. Holcomb is a little disingenuous when she mentions what the OFM said we might be taking in tax money. The OFM said we could take in $2 billion over 5 years. They also said we could take in 0, which means we'll actually be losing money because there are programs that we're going to have to set up and fund just to get to that point. They said that we could get to 0 because the second the federal government sues the state of Washington, that's what we're going to have is no sales, which is no sales taxes. They've also written in a poison pill into their own bill. They wrote in there it's Section 10, paragraph 9, they said, here are the rules that the Liquor Control Board, here are all the issues the Liquor Control Board has to take into account when setting up rules for and regulations for advertising amounts of marijuana, everything to do with it. And it's A, B, C, D, E. A, you must consider the conflict between federal law and state law on marijuana in the state of Washington. At that point, they're going to do what the governor did a year ago, and they're going to go, oh, it's illegal under federal law, and they're going to finish their coffee and they're going to go home. So there's not going to be any regulations, which means there's not going to be any growers, there's not going to be any stores, there's not going to be any tax money, there's going to be no benefit to the state whatsoever. At that point, by the way, she also said there's no way to preempt federal law on this. Yes, there is. In fact, Title 21, Section 903 of the Controlled Substances Act gives the power to control controlled substances to the states. I know you've all heard that federal law trumps state law, but not on controlled substances. So if we in fact legalized marijuana on a state level, removed it from the Controlled Substances Act, removed every law that makes marijuana illegal in the state of Washington, and at the same time set up rules for growers and dispensing and taxation, we could in fact do that, but this is not a legalization bill. This is it's a scam on the voters. This law does not remove one single criminal penalty on marijuana in the state of Washington, and in fact adds 3 more and adds a per se DUID law that will criminalize every single medical marijuana in the state of Washington every time they get behind the wheel. And it will also criminalize everyone under 21 who drives with any THC in their system, which means that's over 3/4 of our college students could end up with records for criminal records for the rest of their lives for driving under the influence of drugs when they're absolutely not impaired in any way, shape, or form. And that's not my idea of legalization, and that is going to clog our court system.
Okay, thank you. We'll start the question and answer portion, and we'll go to the pro side first with Ms. Holcomb. For those of us that aren't well versed in this, you can maybe answer. Is the marijuana in the state license going to be weaker than the illegal marijuana? What is the .03 all about?
Okay, so there's 2 different questions there, actually. I'll start with the second half. The 0.3% definition that is now included in the definition of marijuana under Initiative 502 is actually 0.3 or 0.3% is the concentration of THC in cannabis that separates the intoxicant form of marijuana from industrial hemp. Some of you may be familiar with that product. What that does in effect by redefining marijuana so that it only applies to cannabis that's over that percentage means that we're decriminalizing industrial hemp and making it no longer illegal for farmers to grow it under state law. With respect to the classes and the strengths, though, what we do in Initiative 502 is we actually assign that work to the regulatory agencies to come up with classes of marijuana that define marijuana by THC concentration, cannabinoid profile, all the things that a consumer would want to know. I grew up in Oklahoma where you can go and buy 3.2 beer. I can't remember seeing that here in Washington, but you can select whether you want to have beer or 151 rum. Turns out most people choose beer over 151 rum. So we will create those classes. There will be no particular limitation, but we will be requiring producers and retailers to let consumers know what it is that they're buying.
Thank you, and we'll go to Mr. Sarich.
Yes, the 0.3% THC level as defining hemp is ridiculous. If you go to the American Hemp Council, they will tell you that most hemp is around 1% and can be up to 3%. They don't believe that they can produce hemp at 0.3%. So we've established that you can have legal hemp if you could ever possibly grow it at 0.3%. And if you grow hemp and it goes over 0.3%, then all of a sudden it's marijuana, and now you have fields of it that are now illegal. What Dr. Rothman and John McKay have both said at previous debates is that the Liquor Control Board is going to limit the potency of the marijuana that can be sold in the state stores. If we do that, why would anyone go and buy pot light for the same amount of money that they can get real pot for on any street corner? So you're not eliminating any black market by selling pot light, and no one's going to pay 25% tax at 3 levels of distribution and then a 10% tax at the end to get something that's less potent than what they can buy from their friend next door.
Thank you. Do you want to rebut? You have a minute to rebut anything he said.
Sure. I guess if I thought that it was a plausible argument that by regulating the percentage of intoxicating substance in a substance would create or would allow a black market to continue thriving, I would expect to see Al Capone still running around trying to sell us really high potent alcohol. The reality is the alcohol market in this country is overwhelmingly, the majority of it is for beer. Yes, we can go buy really strong alcohol. That's not what we choose to buy most of the time. So I think that the demand will control the market.
Thank you. And we'll start with you on the next question. Child student abuse of marijuana is already a problem. Do you think child student abuse of marijuana will increase with the increased availability of marijuana under I-502?
No, I don't. I think everybody who wants to smoke marijuana right now is smoking marijuana right now. What this will do, however, it will criminalize them every time they get behind the wheel because it has a zero tolerance law, and they won't even know it. That joint they smoked Tuesday, 3 weeks later, is still in their system. They don't feel impaired. They're driving and they get pulled over, and they could end up with a DUID on their record that could end their Pell Grants for college. Okay, it could wind them up in jail. They'll certainly have a record for driving under the influence of drugs for the rest of their lives, and try to get a job in today's market with a DUID on your record.
Ms. Holcomb?
Preventing youth use of marijuana was one of the primary motivating factors behind the drafting of Initiative 502. It's a very serious concern because we know that young people are more vulnerable to the health risks of marijuana use than adults are. If we can keep kids from trying marijuana until after they're 18, their prospects for not getting into trouble with marijuana, not having long-term health problems is significantly greater. So we drafted it not only to dedicate funding to evidence-based programs that we know work in preventing youth use, but we also took a hard look at what we know already works, and that's the tobacco model. I think everyone should be aware of a very disturbing fact right now is that the Centers for Disease Control just reported this year that more high school students are now smoking marijuana than are smoking tobacco. Think about that. The reason why that's so important is that if it were availability that drove use, you would see a lot more tobacco use, wouldn't you? You wouldn't have tobacco use be lower because tobacco is legal for anybody 18 or over. It's available in convenience stores. It's available in grocery stores. It's available in your mom and dad's pockets. But kids are choosing not to smoke tobacco because we're giving them good information through the truth.com strategies, through other public health strategies, and they're making smart choices. We're not doing that with marijuana. We could. This is something that needs to be controlled through education, through establishing cultural norms, by controlling where you can smoke. All of the restrictions on where you can smoke in public apply under I-502 to smoking marijuana. There's no difference between the two. So we can have good outcomes for kids. We can have better outcomes for kids with a public health approach than we have with our criminal model. Right now, street dealers are selling marijuana and they don't check IDs.
Thank you. Do you want to rebut anything?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
You're right. Street dealers don't check for IDs, and street dealers are not going away when you pass I-502. And you may have a fewer kids smoking cigarettes now because when you raise the tobacco tax, so it's now $10 a pack, that probably did more than anything. But you're not going to curb teen smoking simply because you pass a law that says you're going to throw them in jail every time they get behind the wheel. That's a terrible thing to do to our kids.
Thank you. I'll combine a couple questions here, and we'll begin with you, Ms. Holcomb. One says, why should I consider voting in favor of an initiative that the police and sheriff oppose, and somebody else brings in? MAD and other very respected organizations believe that if I-502 passes, DUIs will increase dramatically. Do you agree or disagree? And could you speak to, I guess, law enforcement?
Sure. With respect to the DUI issue first, Initiative 502 contains a new per se standard that's the legal equivalent to the .08 for alcohol, so that if somebody is observed driving impaired, the police officer decides to pull them over, the police officer asks them to do field sobriety tests, observe their eyes, et cetera, and develops probable cause to arrest them. They can take them in and take a test. This is all under current law. Right now, if your breathalyzer comes back under .08 and they still think you're impaired, right now they can still take you in for a blood test to see if you're under the influence of a drug, whether it's an illegal drug or a legally prescribed drug. Doesn't matter. If you're driving impaired by any substance, you're a risk to other people on the roadway, and you can be charged with DUI. And so we established a per se standard in Initiative 502 to send the strong signal that, yes, we're going to legalize marijuana, but we're not going to say that it's okay for you to be driving impaired. And if you drive over this level, you can be convicted of DUI the same way if you drive over .08. With respect to law enforcement opposing it, I think by and large, most of the law enforcement officials that I speak to care about the exact same things that the people that support I-502 do. They care about public safety, they care about public health, and unfortunately, they are coming off of decades of being sold the idea that using the criminal justice system is going to fix the problem with marijuana, and the data just doesn't hold up. We arrested 29% of all illegal drug arrests back in the early 90s, 29% were for marijuana. Now it's over half. So we've increased the number of people that we arrest for marijuana. Marijuana use rates have stayed level. There's 363,000 current marijuana users in the state. Arresting people isn't working. It's time to try something different. We can't keep spending money on the status quo.
Okay, thank you, and we'll move on to Mr. Sarich.
Per se DUID laws are part of the drug czar's plan for the new strategy for prohibition in this country. According to the drug czar, per se DUID laws have nothing to do with impairment. They have no relationship to impairment. Drugged driving doesn't mean that you're driving impaired. Drugged driving means you're driving with any amount of a detectable illegal drug in your system. So now what we're going to do is we're going to throw the Fourth Amendment out the window, because we're going to now, the Washington State Patrol has asked for $2 million to train drug recognition experts. They're all going to be drug recognition experts. Now probable cause is going to go out the window, because in I-502, what it says is a written statement from an officer that says, that pulls you over for whatever reason. You don't have to be pulled over because you were driving impaired. Your taillight could be out. We've all been pulled over and not arrested and not been impaired and not been pulled over for impairment. A lot of people will get pulled over, then the officer finds out that they're impaired. This drug recognition officer, all he has to do is look at you and say, in my professional, trained, expert opinion, you look like you're stoned. That now, under 502, becomes prima facie evidence and overcomes all probable cause. You're going straight to the hospital for a blood test. And if you happen to have your two little girls in the car with you at the time, they're going along with CPS. And now, and if they find that you have 5 nanograms or more in your system, your kids are going to be taken away from you, and you're also going to be charged with reckless endangerment. Good luck getting your kids back.
Thank you. Do you want to rebut anything?
The notion that probable cause goes out the window and that police officers can start randomly and illegally arresting people who aren't impaired and taking them in for the blood test is utter bunk. There is absolutely nothing about our DUI laws and how they're enforced that is changed by 502. The only thing that has changed at all is what can happen if everything that happens right now, every procedural safeguard that happens right now, happens. And then the blood test gets ordered by a prosecutor who has decided to charge you with DUI, and then, this is weeks after you've been pulled over, that blood test comes back and it's 5 nanograms. Police officer has no way of knowing what your blood test is. The blood test has absolutely nothing to do with what the police officer does in the field. It's only relevant if the prosecutor decides to charge you and then can introduce that blood test at trial. If we thought that police officers were going to start ignoring the Constitution because of a per se standard, we probably would have seen that happen in the 14 states that already have THC per se laws, 11 of which are zero tolerance across the board, which is not 502's rule.
Okay, thank you. And we'll begin with a con-side on this question. I think we'll try and get in a few questions here at the end, and so we're going to limit you to 1 minute and no rebuttal. Isn't marijuana an introductory drug to harder drugs? Do the benefits really outweigh the negatives, crime, destruction of human lives due to addiction?
Well, as we usually say around our house, we believe that mother's milk was the original gateway drug. Drug dealers are the gateway. Okay, drug dealers are the gateway. Marijuana is not the gateway. Marijuana, I'm a medical cannabis patient. I use medical cannabis every day. By the way, under 502, I will have to move out of the state because right now I'm at about 4 or 5 times the legal limit. Hopefully I don't seem too impaired at the moment. But at some point in time, we have to get rid of the idea that marijuana is a gateway drug. The evidence just is not there to prove that.
The National Institutes of Health studied the issue of the gateway drug as part of their research about marijuana, its potential medical uses. And what they found is that there's nothing about marijuana itself that pharmacologically is a gateway, in the sense that if you use marijuana, that will encourage you to use harder drugs. What they did find were 2 different things. That The gateway theory is essentially really a social theory. People who use marijuana currently, especially when they're young, probably have a lot of other factors going on in their lives that are going to contribute to a higher risk of substance use. And second, the fact that we have marijuana in the illegal market makes it more likely that the people that are going to offer you marijuana are also going to offer you other harder drugs. This is why in the Netherlands, their government decided to try to separate marijuana from the harder drugs by creating these coffee shops where adults can go and buy small amounts of marijuana to use. And they were successful. They actually saw a decline in the use of harder drugs like heroin and cocaine. So it's a social theory rather than a biological one.
Thank you. We'll combine a couple questions here, and maybe I'll give you a minute and a half. And we'll start, let me see, on the pro side. So this says the state of Washington just voted to end state-run operated liquor stores. Why would we now want to have state-run operated marijuana stores? And if this initiative does not pass, would you support the decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana for personal use?
Yes, to the second question, definitely. With respect to the first, Initiative 502 does not have the state owning and operating the stores like we did with liquor. However, what we did was look at the liquor store model as the model. They're privately owned and operated, heavily regulated and enforced and licensed by the state. We wanted these to be standalone, marijuana-only stores that can't advertise, that have the 1,600 square inches for signage, 1,000 feet from schools, playgrounds, parks. So we wanted them to look that way, but they will be owned and operated by private individuals and not by the state government.
Thank you. Mr. Sarich.
As long as we don't legalize it in the state of Washington, if we do not take it out of Schedule I in the Controlled Substances Act 6950, the federal government and John McKay, who is a supporter of 502, has already said that he thinks they're writing a lawsuit right now, and we will have no defense because it's still illegal in the state of Washington. So it's kind of pointless to decide if liquor stores should be running this or not, because no one's going to be doing it unless we legalize it here in the state of Washington, and 502 does not legalize it.
Thank you. We'll move on to your closing statement, and they do have 2 minutes, and we'll begin with Ms. Holcomb.
What we're doing right now isn't working. We are not having the impacts that we want to have on marijuana use. We're especially failing our young people. We can do a lot better. We do not need to be tying up police officers with adults who are making choices that might be bad for their health. Police officers have better things to do with their time. We have more important needs for them to meet. We can address adult use of marijuana through a public health model, and we can do better by our children. We can do a better job at controlling advertising, controlling where we locate marijuana stores, who has access to marijuana, and most importantly, who is in control of the market. Why are we letting the thugs run the marijuana market? We should have law-abiding, licensed business owners who agree to follow the law, who agree to pay their taxes, who agree to control the quality and quantity of what they're making available to adults running this market. They should be in control. That way we can separate the demand that is sending billions of dollars to the black market right now from that black market. We can take those adults and their dollars and funnel that into our communities where the money can do good for us instead of doing good for the cartels in Mexico and the gangs up in Canada and the people that are operating outside the margins here in the state of Washington. Initiative 502 is definitely not a pro-marijuana initiative. It is an anti-prohibition initiative. It is a pro-public safety, pro-public health, pro-Washington communities initiative. And for those reasons, I ask you to vote yes on Initiative 502 this November. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. Sarich, you get the final 2 words, or 2 minutes.
Thank you.
You can use more than 2 words.
Thank you. Look, let's assume that the federal government's going to stop us from selling the 93.5 tons of marijuana, which is federally illegal and is still illegal under the state law. What are we going to have left? We're now going to criminalize another 10,000 people a year for something far more serious than possession of marijuana. the Office of Financial Management, the Department of Licensing, said that they plan on taking in $4 million in fines under the new DUIDs. $4 million. That works out to about 4,624 new DUIDs every year in the state of Washington, and they expect that number to go up dramatically once all of the officers in the state of Washington are trained. What all the science said, this is all the science. They claim there's no science. There's plenty of science, and it all says the same thing. You cannot judge impairment by THC level in the blood. Richard Nixon's former drug czar and first head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse gets even stronger about it. He says, he uses the word impossible twice in this report. It is impossible to determine impairment by THC content in the blood. And this is someone who hates marijuana, okay? So you don't legalize it by putting into effect another law that makes it even more dangerous and more illegal than what we have today. Please vote no on 502. This is a scam, it's a Trojan horse, and it's going to hurt our kids worse than anybody.
Thank you. I don't want you to leave immediately. I have a few closing words, but I want to thank you both, Mr. Sarich and Ms. Holcomb, for being with us tonight, and give you a round of applause for helping us better understand. I think this is a tough one. I want to thank the students in the leadership here at CBC and their staff for helping to make tonight's forum possible, and especially thank Charter for being here after all these years, recording and replaying these for us. Thank you for coming, and I hope you'll encourage your friends and neighbors to become informed voters like you, and definitely make sure you get those ballots in. Thank you again.